Ethan Cole sat by the wide glass window of his tall apartment in New York City. Snow was falling outside, quiet and steady, covering the streets in white. The city lights sparkled below like tiny stars on the ground. Inside, everything was silent. The fireplace burned softly in the corner, giving off more light than warmth. A large tree stood near the window, decorated with silver ribbons and golden balls, but it looked perfect in a cold and empty way. He had paid someone to decorate it, had paid someone to deliver the food that sat untouched on the table. He could pay for almost anything, except company, except warmth. Ethan had been named one of the top young CEOs in America 3 years in a row. Magazines called him the man who built an empire before 35. His office tower rose high above the city, shining like his reputation. But on Christmas Eve, there was no one to call, no one who would come over. He had told his staff to take the week off. He had no family visiting, and no friends left who called without a reason. He walked across the room and poured himself some coffee that had gone cold a long time ago. The taste was bitter, but he barely noticed. He turned on the television, only to turn it off again. Every channel was full of families laughing, children opening gifts, music playing, smiles that looked easy and real. Ethan took a slow breath. He remembered when this night used to mean something. Before his parents passed away, before his younger brother stopped talking to him, before his life became a string of emails, deals, and meetings. Or, somewhere along the way, he had traded all the noisy love of holidays for silence. Outside, carolers moved along the street below, their voices drifting up faintly. He could hear bits of a song, warm and bright, and for a moment he stood still. It tugged somewhere deep inside him. He looked around at the huge apartment, so clean and perfect that it looked like a picture in a magazine. Not a single sign of life, except for him and his reflection in the glass. The clock struck 11. He thought of booking a flight to somewhere warmer, anywhere that did not smell like winter and memories. But then again, where would he even go? He had traveled the world for work, seen beaches, mountains, cities. No place had felt like home. He sat on the long leather sofa and leaned his head back. His phone buzzed once with a message. It was a holiday greeting from a company partner. He replied politely and put the phone face down. After that came more silence. He stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about anything. The sound came softly at first. A small, careful knock. He frowned. Nobody knocked on his door. His building had security, an elevator code, and a doorman. He waited. Then it came again, slightly louder, quiet but sure. He stood up and crossed the room, curious but cautious. When he opened the door, a rush of cold air slipped in. The hallway was empty, silent. No one was there. He looked left and right, but there was nothing except the soft hum of the heater and a single box on the floor. The box was small and wrapped in plain brown paper, with a little red ribbon on top. On it lay a single folded note. The handwriting looked neat but hurried. He hesitated, picked it up, and closed the door behind him. Inside the box were 3 small ornaments shaped like snowflakes. They were handmade, uneven but charming, painted in bright colors. The note read in careful letters, "For the man who forgot how to smile." Ethan stared at the words for a long time. He read them again, as if trying to find a clue. He had never met anyone who would dare tease him like that. He looked again at the front of the note. There was no name, no address, only a small drawing of 3 little stick figures holding hands. Something inside him shifted slightly. It was a strange feeling he could not name. He put the ornaments on the table and looked at them again. The paint was smudged in places, and flecks of glitter clung to his fingers. It felt real, human. He turned toward the large window once more. Down below, the streets shimmered with light, and snow kept falling. Somewhere in that great city, someone had walked all the way to his door and left this for him. Someone who had written those words and meant them. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of curiosity. He did not know who they were, but something about those little snowflakes and that note warmed him more than the fireplace or his $1,000,000 view ever could. Outside, another gust of wind swept over the city, brushing white snow past his window. Inside, Ethan Cole stood still, holding a tiny paper note that had begun to change the emptiness of his Christmas night. Ethan could not stop looking at the small note resting on his table. Those simple words stayed in his mind like an echo that would not fade. The box with the handmade ornaments seemed to brighten the cold room. He picked one up again and turned it slowly in his hands. The painted colors looked uneven and cheerful. He noticed tiny smudges of glue on one corner. Whoever had made them had done it with care, not skill. That made it even more beautiful. He looked toward the window where the snow still fell thick and steady. He thought about the footprints that might still be outside his door. Perhaps the person who left the box was still in the building. He set on his coat, grabbed his gloves, and stepped out into the hall. The quiet of the corridor pressed around him. Carpet muffled his steps as he moved toward the elevator. The lobby was nearly empty. Only one security guard sat behind the desk, half watching a small television. Ethan walked over and asked if anyone had come up earlier. The guard shook his head and said no one had signed in. Ethan frowned. That meant whoever left the box must have used the stairs or slipped in when someone else entered. The idea was strange, but somehow thrilling. Outside, the street was bright with lights and people hurrying home from late dinners or parties. He tucked the note into his coat pocket and stepped into the soft snow. The air was cold and sharp against his face. He looked down and noticed faint small footprints near the edge of the walkway. They were light and closely spaced, like those of children. He followed them quietly as they led away from his building. The footprints wound around the corner toward a row of brick houses with warm lights glowing behind their windows. The air smelled of baked cookies and pine. He hesitated for a moment. If he was wrong, he might look like a fool, but something inside told him to keep walking. His shoes crunched softly as he moved forward, following the trail until it ended near a small house with a red door. From inside came the sound of laughter. It was high and bright, like bells. Ethan stood still, unsure what to do. He could see shapes moving behind the curtains. He was about to turn back when the door opened suddenly. A woman stepped out with a basket of snow-dusted scarves in her arms. Her hair was tied back loosely, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. She looked surprised to see a tall man in a dark coat staring at her house. They looked at each other for a second that felt very long. She spoke first, her voice warm and curious. She asked if he was looking for someone. Ethan cleared his throat and held out the small note. He told her that it had been left at his door not long ago. The woman blinked and then smiled, realizing something. She turned toward the inside of the house and called loudly. 3 small voices answered at once. A moment later, 3 girls appeared behind her, all with the same bright eyes and messy hair. They peeked around their mother's legs in wonder at the stranger standing outside. Each of them wore a handmade paper crown and held a ribbon-covered box. The tallest one pointed and whispered that it was the man from the tower. Ethan looked completely lost, and the woman laughed softly. She invited him inside to escape the cold. The warmth of the house wrapped around him the moment he stepped in. The smell of cocoa and cinnamon filled the air. Toys and glitter lay scattered across the floor. The tree in the corner was short and uneven, but glowing with kindness. The 3 girls watched him curiously. He bent down and thanked them for the gift they had left. Their mother introduced herself as Claire Harper. She explained that the girls had decided to leave small gifts for strangers on Christmas Eve. They called it their Secret Santa surprise. One of them had insisted that the tall building nearby must have someone lonely at the top. Ethan listened in silence, a bit taken aback. He asked why they thought so. One of the girls, Grace, said that the lights on the high floor never changed color, and no one ever stood near the window. She thought maybe the person who lived there needed Christmas the most. Ethan felt something tighten gently in his chest. Claire smiled and said the girls had stayed up late making the ornaments by hand. They used old paint and leftover glitter from school crafts. Ethan looked around the cozy room again. Everything felt alive, soft, real, in a way he had not felt for years. He accepted a cup of cocoa that Claire offered him. The warmth of the drink spread through his hands. The children began to chatter about their secret plans and school stories. Soon, Ethan found himself sitting on the old couch with the girls showing him drawings and Christmas cards. Claire sat nearby, watching with gentle amusement. The room glowed with easy laughter. For once, Ethan did not know or care about time. Every word and sound seemed to press light into the quiet places inside him. Somewhere in that moment, the cold businessman began to feel something he had forgotten. When he finally stood to leave, the snowfall outside had slowed, and the world seemed different. Claire walked him to the door. She smiled and said the girls were happy he liked their surprise. Ethan thanked her, holding the note once more in his hand. The walk back to his building felt shorter, but every step carried a new sense of warmth. The city lights no longer looked distant. For the first time in many winters, his heart felt almost awake. Ethan woke up the next morning still thinking about the small house with the red door. The images of Claire and the three girls stayed clear in his mind. He had not felt that kind of peace in years. The sound of their laughter had followed him home like an echo that refused to fade. He poured himself coffee and stood again at the wide window, watching the city move slowly under the daylight snow. The ornaments sat on his table next to the folded note. They looked oddly bright against the gray and silver tones of his home. He picked one up and smiled softly. Something inside him wanted to see them again. It was not just curiosity anymore. It was an easy pull from the heart, quiet but strong. He tried to focus on work, but the numbers and emails on his screen blurred. After an hour, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and stepped outside. The air was crisp and full of the scent of snow. He found himself walking without planning toward the same red door he had seen the night before. When he reached the house, he heard voices and small bursts of laughter from inside. He hesitated, unsure if it was right to disturb them. Then the door opened suddenly, and one of the triplets, Lila, spotted him. Her face lit up with surprise. She called out in joy and ran to tell her mother that the tall man from the tower had come back. Claire appeared, her cheeks a soft pink from the warmth inside. She smiled and greeted him kindly, asking if he had lost something. Ethan explained that he simply wanted to thank them properly. He handed her a bag he carried. Inside were 3 new sets of craft paint and brushes. He told her it was for the girls, since they seemed to enjoy making things by hand. Claire looked at the gift and shook her head gently. She told him that it was not necessary, but the thought was kind. The girls squealed in delight anyway, already planning what they would paint next. Claire laughed and invited him inside for tea. Ethan stepped into the cozy room again. The heat touched his face, and the smell of bread filled the air. The girls were sitting on the floor surrounded by colored paper. They were making cards to give their neighbors. The youngest, Sophie, showed Ethan a drawing of a small snowman holding hands with a man in a suit. She said she had drawn him because he looked lonely in the window last night. The honesty of her words made Ethan pause. He smiled shyly and told her he looked much less lonely now. Claire watched the exchange quietly. There was something about Ethan that seemed different from most people she met. Though he wore an expensive coat and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed, there was a sadness in his eyes that softened him. She asked him to sit while she poured tea. Ethan looked around as he sat on the couch. The house was filled with small signs of life. Paper snowflakes hung from strings. Photos lined the walls. Everything felt touched by love and memory. Claire brought a tray with tea and small cookies sprinkled with sugar. He thanked her and took one. It melted sweetly on his tongue. They talked for a while about simple things. He told her about how his company made software that powered hospitals and schools across the city. She told him about her class of 6-year-old students and how every day was a new adventure with them. The conversation flowed easily, surprising them both. When the girls finished their crafts, they brought them proudly to show Ethan. He admired every single one, commenting with care. Grace handed him a card she had made that said, "You are welcome at our house any time." Ethan looked at Claire, unsure what to say. She only smiled and said the girls had good manners. The afternoon light turned golden as it filled the room. The streets outside quieted. Claire stood and lit a candle on the table. The flickering glow made the space even warmer. For a long moment, everything felt peaceful. Ethan sat back and let the sounds of small voices wash over him. He could not remember the last time he felt so safe. When it was time to go, he thanked Claire again for letting him visit. She walked him to the door. The girls waved from the couch with sticky fingers covered in paint. Claire said that he was welcome to stop by any time, though her voice carried a hint of surprise that he might actually do it. He promised he would return soon. As he stepped back into the cold evening, Ethan felt a deep calm spread through him. The streets glowed under gentle lights, and the snow fell in soft flakes. He realized that something inside him had changed. The walls he kept around his heart had started to bend. It felt like the beginning of something new, something he did not yet understand but did not want to lose. He looked up once more at the tower rising above the city. It no longer looked like a refuge. It looked like a lonely island in a land of light. He smiled to himself and began the walk back with a strange thought blooming quietly in his chest. His Christmas no longer felt empty. It had finally started to feel a little bit alive. Ethan kept his promise and visited the red door house again 2 days later. This time he carried a small box filled with candies wrapped in silver paper. The streets were still covered with white snow that sparkled under the winter sun. As he reached the house, he could hear faint sounds of singing. The Triplet girls were standing by the window, their faces bright with joy as they waved at him. When Claire opened the door, she laughed and said they had been waiting for him since morning. Inside the house, it smelled of cookies and cinnamon again. The girls ran around excitedly. Claire shook her head with a warm smile and told them to let their guests sit down first. Ethan laughed and said he did not mind the noise at all. He placed the box of candies on the table and told them it was a thank you gift. The girls clapped their hands and each picked one candy with careful delight. Claire had been baking bread and she offered him a slice with butter. As they talked, Ethan told her that he had never spent Christmas with anyone since his parents passed away. Claire listened quietly, her eyes full of kindness. She said that sometimes life takes away much, but it still leaves small ways to heal. She told him that her husband had been a firefighter who died helping others. Since then, she had found strength in raising her daughters and keeping their world full of hope. Ethan nodded slowly and looked at the girls who were now building towers from blocks on the floor. He felt a deep respect for Claire. She carried her pain with grace, turning it into love for her children and for others. The rest of the afternoon passed easily. The girls asked Ethan to help them hang new paper ornaments on the tree, followed their instructions carefully while they giggled at his clumsy moves. At one point, Sophie handed him a piece of broken string and asked if he could fix it. Ethan tried tying the knot twice, failing both times. When he finally managed it, the tiny girl clapped, as if he had performed magic. Later, Claire picked up an old wooden music box from a shelf. It was clearly worn out and made a soft rattle when turned. She said it had stopped working a long time ago. Ethan examined it and noticed that one small part inside was loose. His hands knew precision from years of handling tiny pieces of technology. Within minutes, he had the spring reset. When he turned the key again, the box played a thin tune that grew fuller with each note. The girls gasped in delight. Claire looked at Ethan with surprise and gratitude. The melody filled the small room. Something about it felt like a thread tying them all together. Ethan felt calm and strange at the same time, like he belonged in a story he did not know he needed. Before leaving, Ethan promised the girls he would come back the next day for their snowman contest. Claire laughed and said they would hold him to that. As he walked back through the snow, he noticed how easily he smiled now. Even strangers passing by seemed less distant. The next day, he returned early to help roll the heavy snowballs for the snowmen. The girls ran in bright coats, their laughter carrying through the cold air. Claire stood nearby holding mugs of cocoa for everyone. They built 3 snowmen in a row, each with buttons for eyes and scarves around their necks. Then Ethan built a 4th one slightly taller, with a little paper tie. The girls named it Mr. Cole and laughed every time they looked at it. As evening fell, Claire invited him inside again to warm up. He sat by the soft fire while she prepared soup. The girls were on the floor, drawing pictures of their snowmen. Claire joined him at the table and said she had rarely seen her children so happy. Ethan replied that he could say the same about himself. She smiled quietly at that, as if she understood more than his words. When it was time for him to leave, the girls each handed him one of their new drawings. On the back, Grace had written "Our friend." The words looked simple, but they carried a weight that reached deep inside him. He thanked them all and stepped out into the night again, holding the pictures close to his chest. The walk home was peaceful. The snow crunched softly under his steps. Above him, the city lights glowed but no longer looked distant. He knew he would never see the world in the same way again. That little red door had opened something far greater inside him. For years he had lived behind glass walls, but now those walls seemed thinner. In their place was something warmer, something that could not be measured or priced. When Ethan reached his penthouse, he placed the drawings next to the ornaments. The quiet room seemed smaller now, yet somehow brighter. For the first time in many years, he whispered a thank you to the night. He did not know who he was becoming, but he liked the feeling. His soul felt lighter. as if tied to invisible strings that now connected him to something real and living in the world beyond his window. Christmas morning arrived with a pale golden light spreading over the city. Snow covered every rooftop and branch like a soft blanket. Ethan woke early, long before the usual sounds of traffic began. His apartment felt different now. The silence no longer pressed against him as before. It seemed calmer, almost friendly. The smell of pine filled the air from the small tree he had decorated again the night before. He looked at the ornaments made by the girls and smiled. The sight of them brought a gentle warmth to his chest. He stood at the window, looking out at the quiet streets below. He thought about how each Christmas used to be the same routine of work calls and empty dinners. This morning was not like that. He could still hear the girls' laughter in his mind. He could still feel the joy of fixing the music box and the snow fight that had left his coat soaked. Those memories felt more real than anything his business success had ever given him. By mid-morning, he decided to visit Claire and the girls again. Carried a red bag with small gifts he had chosen for each of them. For the triplets, he had found a set of new storybooks and a box of colored pencils. For Claire, he had bought a simple snow globe with a tiny house inside. When he shook it, tiny flakes danced around the small home. He smiled, thinking it looked like hers. The streets were quiet as he walked. People he passed greeted him kindly, and he found himself nodding in return. It was a small change, but it felt like a miracle inside him. When he reached the familiar red door, he heard cheerful laughter from inside. Before he could knock, the door opened, and all three girls shouted his name. They jumped with excitement, pulling him inside as Claire looked on, laughing softly. The house was glowing from the morning light. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen. Christmas decorations hung across the walls, made from paper and ribbon. The place looked brighter than ever. Claire greeted him and wished him a Merry Christmas. Ethan handed her the red bag shyly. She opened it carefully and smiled at the sight of the gifts. The girls squealed at their books and pencils, hugging them tightly. Claire held the snow globe in her hands and turned it once. The flakes twirled inside. She said it was beautiful and thanked him with a warmth that went straight to his heart. They shared breakfast together, sitting around the small table. The girls talked endlessly about their plans for the day. They wanted to visit neighbors, sing songs, and give away cookies they had baked. Ethan listened to their chatter with a soft smile, and Claire asked if he had anywhere else to be that day. He looked at her and said honestly that he could not think of any place better than right where he was. After breakfast, the girls dressed warmly and led them all outside. They carried a basket of cookies wrapped in paper. Neighbors smiled as the little group walked down the street spreading cheer. Ethan felt lighter with every laugh, every greeting. For years, Christmas had felt like a wall standing between him and happiness. Now it felt like a bridge leading him back to life. Later, when the cookies were all given away, they returned home tired but happy. Claire poured hot cocoa again, and they sat by the fire as evening began to fall. The music box Ethan had repaired still played softly in the background. The room shimmered in the glow of the firelight. Leela was curled up with a new book while Sophie and Grace drew colorful shapes with their new pencils. Claire sat on the couch near Ethan, her hands holding the snow globe gently in her lap. She told him that the girls had found more than a new friend this Christmas. They had learned that even strangers can become part of a family if they bring kindness into each other's lives. Ethan looked at her and felt a quiet emotion rise within him. He told her that she and the girls had given him the greatest gift he had ever received, the feeling of belonging again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire flickered, and the faint hum of the city outside faded into stillness. Ethan realized that this small house, noisy and full of love, had become the brightest part of his world. He did not see wealth or power here, only truth and warmth. When the clock touched midnight, Ethan stood and looked around once more. The girls had fallen asleep on the floor, their drawings spread around them like a soft blanket of colors. Claire watched them lovingly, her eyes tender. Ethan whispered a gentle thank you to her. She smiled and said he did not need to thank anyone because the best gifts always come from the heart. As he stepped outside, the sky was full of slow-falling snowflakes. He looked up at them and took a deep breath. Something inside him was different now. He no longer felt like the lonely man in the tall tower. His life no longer felt hollow. The night air carried a special peace he had not known before. Ethan walked home with steady steps. When he reached his apartment, He placed the snow globe on the table beside the handmade ornaments. The light from the city windows reflected off the glass, making the small house inside glow gently. He sat by the window again, but this time he did not feel alone. He felt the strings that tied his heart to the laughter, to the music box, to the red door that had welcomed him in. Christmas had given him something far greater than presents. It had given him a family of the heart and a new sense of purpose. The man who once stood alone in the cold now carried warmth wherever he went. Knowing that love sometimes finds you when you least expect it and changes everything forever.